around here. We don't have like a set bunch of shit to talk about. I know I was speaking to Whitgear the other day, and he was very much the same thing. He just wants to chat. So don't feel like you got to be grilled or come to the table with any.
No, that's cool. And the thing is, if you've got people who are interested and you're part of a group, just ask questions, because I mean, the thing is, I'll forget a lot of stuff. I've been doing this for nearly 7 years now, 6 years. So there's things I forget to throw in there. Do you know what I mean? Which are basic, but I mean, I did them years and years ago. So it even down to what sort of land should I look for, and and what's best? What are the pros and cons?
Exactly. And that's probably what I'm going to be doing with you today, too, because as someone, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you right now. Sometimes I always wait a little bit too long to do this. I am here with a very esteemed guest, everybody. You've probably seen him around. He was just on Millennial. He's been popping up on a lot of people's shows. Pretty popular content creator, as far as I am concerned, named the Woodlander. And Woodlander can be found on YouTube, who I believe just celebrated his 10,000th subscriber to there, which is a very, very big milestone. You can also find him on Telegram at t.me/t_Woodlander. It's been a very, very big year for this gentleman. I've seen his name everywhere. Everyone's got a lot of questions because what I know him for, and I'm going to let him describe himself in a second, but what I know him for is being a homesteader, living off the grid, building his own house in the woods. Like everyone in our scene talks about, everyone has the dream of doing it. This guy's done it, and he's actually helped a lot of other people to do it as well. And I'm going to talk to him a bit today. I'm really going to annoy him with a bunch of what might sound like pretty basic questions, but I'm a pretty basic guy. So I'm going to say thank you very much, Mr. Woodland, for taking the time to speak with me today.
It's my pleasure. What a fantastic introduction. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, what I've done here, and I'm in the UK, and I'm going to presume a lot of the listeners are going to be from the States on this. Isn't done that often, or it wasn't done that often. And I think what's happened over the last 3 years has actually woken up a lot of people to how negative and controlling the system can be. And there is certainly more and more people looking at this way of living and asking questions, how it can be done, what do you need to do? And that's great. And we can get into two areas, really. One is the why would you do this, which is always interesting. And the other one, which is how do you do this? And both of those subjects lead down to quite interesting conversations. But it's been a very, very encouraging year for me to see so many people starting to look at this and starting to see that it's viable, completely doable for normal people to build their own place, to own a little piece of land, something that a lot of people think is outside of their means. But there are ways of doing it, and it's becoming popular, which is good.
Yeah, you made a very good point there about normal people doing it, because, I obviously don't want to dox you, but you are a married man, a man who has had children, and you moved off grid with your wife, and you're not old, but you're getting, like myself, I'm in my 30s, you're a bit older than that. Whereas the people who talk about this sort of thing are typically young guys, and they think they got to have sort of a warrior mindset to do. And if you look at a lot of the YouTube videos for people who are into building their own houses, a lot of times it's young guys. And I was very interested in how something like this can be done by just not young single guys, like how you would move a family there, how you would move your wife there, because I don't know if people know a thing or two about having a wife. It can be kind of difficult to get your wife to go along with things. I found that story so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, first of all comes the decision to do this, and for me, it was a logical next step. I mean, I was pretty much off grid, but living in a house. And I don't mean power wise or off the water grid or the electric grid. I was pretty much off grid. So I'd closed down my bank accounts close to sort of 16, 17 years ago. So I only used cash. I had no bank account. So I didn't have a store card. No, I wasn't registered anywhere. I was fairly grey, and was already minimizing my interaction with what I tend to call the system, which is pretty much everything. So I made the decision that I was going to buy some land, build a house, keep some animals, and go off grid. Now, the first thing to remember there is I did have a wife, and at the time I had 2 kids at home as well. So whatever I built had to be enough for a family of 4. And I'd never built, I'll be honest with you, until I started building this place, I'd never even put a shelf up. I had 0 building experience, none. And everything I did here, I learned literally from watching videos on YouTube and speaking to people I knew who were builders or, construction workers or engineers. And literally saying, this is my idea, would this work? And it was fairly simple, I've got to say. I mean, I'm no genius by any means, but I mean, to build the cabin was, I literally looked at a video on YouTube of how to build a large shed. And then I upscaled. I literally just upscaled it from there. So where they were using sort of 2x2 battens, I was using 3x3 posts, and I just made things bigger, and it worked. And kind of different parts along the way, I would go to speak to people and say, look, this is what I've done. Will it fall over? And they were saying, no, that looks perfectly well. If you've done that and you've braced it here, you shouldn't have a problem. And I just carried on. So I think for me, the important thing was to start. The interesting thing was when I bought the land, and it took me a year to find the place, and that was quite an interesting part of it. So for a year, me and my wife just drove around every weekend, and evenings after work during the summer, we would go to all these different places that were for sale, these different plots of land. And I didn't have the money to buy any at the time. I was still saving. So I wasn't going to borrow money. I was going to save whatever money I could. So we had no holidays. We didn't go out to eat. We didn't have takeaways. And every bit of money I could, I just put in a bag at the end of my bed. So I figured I could probably get somewhere for £10,000. I could probably get an acre. So we were driving around for a year looking at all these places. And about 12 months later, we found the plot we're on now. And my wife loved it. And it was a little plot of woodland, 2.5 acres. And she actually fell in love with it the minute we got here. I, on the other hand, was looking at it as I had no forestry experience, and there were trees everywhere. And how on earth was I going to build a cabin like in amongst these trees? So for me, it was kind of different from, I was thinking more of like a hidden away field somewhere which was flat. This place is far from flat, and there's like obstacles everywhere. But I kind of loved the place. It was a beautiful piece of woodland. And after saving for a year, I was still £5,000 short of the asking price. So I spoke with my wife's father, and he agreed to lend me the 5,000. So I bought the place. And my wife was ecstatic, and, we started putting up pens for the chickens. We had chickens at home in the back garden, and we were building pens, and she ran off and then bought 100 more, and then some turkeys. And so, and that was kind of, she was really, really happy with that. And the dogs loved it up here. And she's very much an animal person. She was in her element up the top end of the woods with the chickens and the turkeys and the ducks and the dogs. And I started building. in about the middle of the woodland. So we would come up here every day, every evening and every weekend, and she'd play around with the animals, and I would be down here hammering away with lumps of wood, and she would come down from time to time and sort of say, "Oh, you're getting on well." And the truth of it was, she never, ever thought that this would come to fruition. But she was quite happy that I had a hobby that kept me out of her hair and a nice piece of land where she could have all the animals and play farmer, which was fine for me as well. And she didn't really believe it until the day, and I mean, this thing sort of flew up the externals. So and the roof got on, and then I started doing the inside, and she would come down here and, would sit in here and sort of laugh and joke and have cups of coffee and that. And then the day arrived where I brought her down and I said, right, this is the area. I need you to pick a kitchen. And then it kind of sunk into her that I had built a house. I had actually built a 4-bedroomed, 2,000 square foot home. And she was being asked to furnish it. Then it really sank home, and then she kind of got excited about it and got much more involved. And it's kind of a male female thing. I was more involved with like the building of this place and getting it here, and here it is. And then the internals, what the kitchen looked like, what sort of bath we were going to have, was really of no consequence to me. I'd done the building, I'd got that up, and she got to work picking baths and tiles and colours and kitchens and whatnot, and we worked together on it from that point on. And yeah, I mean, it was pretty good. It was something we could do together.
And it's a very touching story, by the way, because I think that's what I like the most about it is the excitement you get from people who kind of, I always say this, women are very good at this, is they're very wary of their husband's harebrained schemes for a good reason. I have a lot of harebrained schemes. I have a lot of crazy things like we should do this, but then once it becomes real and it's not just something floating in my mind, then they can say, oh, well, this is serious. Now I'm part of this,
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a very male thing is to bring things from idea into reality. Once you've done that, then your wife or your partner will get on board and they will back you 100%. But they need to see this isn't a pipe dream. It's not just a little hobby.
And also, another thing, just to bring this up, is I've noticed, and you might find this amusing, that raising chickens has been very, very popular with a lot of people I know, even living in urban or suburban areas. And my wife had a coworker, a woman who had kids and everything, proper mother, but there's these companies that will like rent you chickens. So you pay a fee and they will come in, give you 5 chickens, set up a coop. It's like an out of the box thing. And people can just kind of play around with chickens, and then they name them and then they give personalities to them and shit. But it's like, this is a business people are running too.
Yeah. I mean, when my wife first got chickens for the back garden, and we had like a 3-bedroom semi, like most people in suburbia, and we had chickens in the back garden. You get used to them really quickly, and they do have personalities, which is incredible. I mean, we've had a number of them that have lived in the house because they've been ill for one reason or another, and you bring them in and you get them better, and then they get quite used to just pottering around the house. And for me, it's always hilarious. We got like 7 dogs here, and the dogs just like avoid the chicken that's walking around eating their dog food. And yeah, but for me, it's a really, I mean, like I mentioned before we started, that I've been doing this for a number of years now, and it's a really good way of living. It's so markedly different from normality. I'm much more in tune with reality, which is nature and life as it should be. I kind of now understand that there are things I have to do. It's not convenient living this way. I need to put myself out. But the reward for that is so much greater. It really is. And I've spoken a number of times about the fact that I will have to chop down a tree, which I've learned to do. And then I will have to cut that up into rounds with a chainsaw. And then I'll have to split those down into logs and then stack those logs for 12 months at least so that they season and dry. And then I can burn that on the log burner, which heats the cabin. So delayed gratification is something you learn rapidly. Instead of just switching a dial to get heat, it's a 12-month process. And a lot of people I know that have been up here are quite amazed with the cabin and its surroundings, and I'd love to live like this. But what they can't get their head around is the fact that you actually have to put yourself out. They're far too wedded to convenience and instant gratification that to live like this would actually be a big wrench for many people. Now, I was lucky that my wife actually took to this and has even rode the problems that you will come across. I mean, for anyone who lives like this will tell you that, water will freeze when it's too cold and you won't have any running water, and things will fall down and you'll get a leak, and because you've built it yourself, and there's mud to contend with because you're in the middle of the woods or in the middle of a field, and that's not how most people live. And you need to understand that the payoff is worth it.
Another funny thing that I have found is, as I get older, and maybe not everyone is like this, but I think you're like this, where I felt very hollow and dirty if I'm just renting. If I know that I'm going to be, the idea of like being in my 50s and 60s and still just renting this, like we rent a house. So we know that if the owner wanted to sell it, we would just, like we could be out by the month. We wouldn't have anything, and it felt very, especially if a family, feels very, very precarious. And so the idea of just having land and having a space you can count on, I think will free a lot of people from the sort of malaise that they're stuck in, like really having something that you can kind of grow into in a sense. But
Yeah,
but
well,
also, sorry, continue. Sorry.
I've come to the same conclusion, but even and people say this to me a lot, that they're a homeowner, and I was a homeowner. We had a mortgage, and that's not owning. The bank owns your home, and will take it off you rapidly if you don't pay them money every month. Exactly the same as rent. If you stop paying your rent, your landlord will have you out of there within 2 months. And the bank, it might take them a little longer, might take them 6 months. But if you stop paying your mortgage for whatever reason, if you lose your job, the bank will take your house, or will take the house back off of you. Because until you make that final payment in 25 to 30 years' time, the bank owns that house. And I was very, very aware of that. I'd been through situations when I was younger. In the 1980s in the UK, we had a property crash and a property boom. And I remember my first house was repossessed because it became unviable to pay for it any longer, and I just flatly refused. So I bought it for £24,000. It was a little one-bedroom place. I split up with my partner, but there was a property boom going on at the time. So 12 months later, it was worth double. It was worth 45. So I could borrow money against the equity, which I did, and paid her half of what we paid for it, paid her 12,000. So I ended up with a £36,000 mortgage on a house worth 45. The following year, we had a property crash in the UK, and the place was valued at £9,000.
Oh no.
So here I am paying a mortgage of 36,000 on a property that's worth 9.
Yeah, you're never going to get out of from underneath that. That's just a doomed position.
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't just me. So many people. And the interest rates were rising as well. So your mortgage payments were going through the roof on a property that you not only had no equity in, but you were in a negative equity position. And thousands of people just had their homes repossessed by the banks. It was quite a scary situation for a lot of people, especially people with families. I didn't have children at the time, thankfully. And I was kind of young and was able to think on the ball. And I got another mortgage, even though I'd had a house repossessed, and bought a much bigger place for less than I'd bought this 1-bedroom one for. So I actually did okay in it, but I was very aware that even if you called yourself a homeowner, the banks owned that building until you had finished paying for it, and would take it off of you if they wish to. So,
and that's very much the case now too, especially where I am, because I'm in Canada and I'm in Ontario. And if anyone wants to look this up, the property value where in the province where I live specifically is astronomical. It's preposterous. So you've got people, some of these houses on even at an inflated price would be $250,000. Now townhouses going for $600,000-$700,000. They are not like the house I'm in right now is probably built maybe a bit worse than the place you're living in right now. Like I know this place they threw it up cheap, right? But people still paying $700,000 for it. I'm like, this is not a tenable position. Everyone kind of knows that, but no one knows what to do about it. So that's kind of where I was at, where me and my wife, we don't really see the prices going down any in the future. So even from a financial perspective, we're like, is it actually more economical to buy land and build a house? And even if you get contractors, that might be what people are looking at right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, from a financial point of view, it's so doable. I mean, if I was to go and buy, and I've actually had this place valued. I've had several friends that work in estate agents and buying, selling properties and whatever, and that they value properties. And I've had them value this place, and the highest value that I've had put on it is £400,000, which is shy of $500,000. But they've literally said, well, what you've got is a 4-bedroom home, and it's done to a pretty good standard, I've got to say, which is nearly twice the size of a 4-bedroom new build that they would build today. In 2 acres of private woodland, with access, so you can just drive straight into the land. If somebody wants to, that's what they want, and it's off-grid and it's working. It's not like it doesn't work. The solar powers the electric, and the water system I've built works. I've got a little bit of tweaking to do, make sure it doesn't freeze in the really cold weather. They've said, up to 400,000. But I mean, even if I was to get half of that, let's say 200,000, the land and the build cost me around 45.
Now, if you were a way worse person, you could say, like, I'm just going to do this forever. I'm going to be a woods flipper. But you're not going to do that, I'm sure.
I mean, you could. I mean, it's strange. It's different in the UK than it is in the States. So, I mean, I had to go a sort of convoluted route to get this place here, because there are planning regulations and planning rules. And if I'd applied for planning permission to build here, they would have just said no. I would never have got it. But there is it's still here at the moment, there is a rule in British law which says that if you build a home and live in it for 4 years and nobody's asked you to stop working on it or take it down, and when they say anyone, that what they actually mean is the council, but it says anyone. So you've not been asked to not do that or take it down within 4 years, then the property then becomes legal, and there's nothing they can do about it after that. It's beyond their remit after 4 years, which was a good reason for building in woodland, because if I could stand in the middle of the woods here and not see my boundary, that meant that nobody could see me. And if they can't see what's here because it's surrounded by trees, then there was very little chance of anyone knowing I was here. I mean, I didn't actually keep it a secret. Everyone who knew me knew what I was doing. But yeah, I mean,
that's a very good point, by the way, because just sorry to interrupt you, but I remember I was listening to you on a stream with another gentleman. His name escapes me, but I know his name was Bjorn. And I know this because he was selling a hat that said Bjorn to be wild, and that's what stuck in my head. But you had addressed something that's very relevant, I think, to Canadians, because we have a similar system called Crown Land, where, and I think we probably do it a bit differently in the UK, but we're essentially the same sort of system as the UK.
Yeah.
But and you had said that some people had come to you and said, "Oh, you'll never really own the land, especially with Crown Land." And you had said that's all bullshit. I was wondering if you had any time to speak on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I did have people saying that, nobody in the whole of the UK owns land. It all belongs to the Crown. And if you delve right into it, and it's a huge rabbit hole and actually quite convoluted and quite complicated, it turns out they could be right. But I've got to be honest, stuff like that, which is archaic law and regulations, and it would take, a Queen's sheriff to come to the land and knock 4 times with staff on the door. And I was like, oh man, this isn't going to happen. Is it something they could do? Well, I'll be honest, if they wanted to get me off of here, they could do it tomorrow. They could just put in a compulsory purchase order. It's that simple.
And it's true that in America they can do it too. They can just show up and burn you down if they wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm as much as I foo-fooed it, I did look into it, and there's a possibility that they're right. In the end, everything in this country belongs to the Queen or to the royal family. Am I worried about that? No. I mean, because in reality, I mean, you know as well as I do, if you buy your house, you've paid it off, you're mortgage free. It's your land, it's your house. And they're not going to, send the Queen Sheriff round, dressed in ermine, knocking on the door because you said something spicy on YouTube. What could happen is they can make your life difficult, but that's true of anyone, right? So I wasn't really bothered about that. What I was bothered about is I didn't borrow money to do this. I didn't have anything when I first started. Like I said, I saved for 12 months and came up short at the end of it, but borrowed 5 and then took the next year paying that 5 back. And then anything I had left at the end of a week, I bought timber. I just went down the timber yard and started buying timber and started the build. And it was usually a weekly thing. I would go down and I'd buy, 150 lengths of timber, and then I would start putting a framework together, and I finished it off the next week. And so I didn't borrow money. I just did it on what I could, what I didn't spend. So I was lucky insofar as I was in a position where I was self-employed. I was earning quite good money, and I did have something left at the end of it. At the end of a week, after paying normal sort of living expenses, I did have something left. What I would say is I've been contacted by lots and lots of people who would really like to do this sort of thing, but don't have any savings and no way of saving, because the cost of living at the moment means that after working 40 hours a week, they have nothing left at the end of it. And that is a problem. And I've had to speak bluntly to some of these people who are lovely people and say, listen, if you're in a position where you cannot put aside even £10 at the end of a week, you need to look at changing the position you're in at the moment first. If that
You had
means,
made a good point on the show where you said people will always live right to the limit of whatever they have. So in a sense, you have to break that part of your mind or your personality that says, if I get $1,000 a week, let's say, I'm going to be spending that $1,000. You know, you almost have to just recorrect your mind to be able to save. Period.
yeah. I mean, I was guilty of this as well. I mean, the thing is, if you earn £500 a week, your outgoings will rapidly be £500 a week because people live up to their means, and a lot of the time, people live over their means. I've lost track of the amount of people that I know have got champagne lifestyles on beer money, but it's all credit. It's all credit. And they put it on the credit card, and then they spend, the reason they've got no money is because they've got 5 credit cards and half their money goes on paying the minimum amount. So the amount rarely decreases on paying these credit cards back and then trying to, get by on half a wage. So I would, I've had to say to people, listen, it is possible. You can do this. But first you need to change your mental outlook, and you need to come to grips with the fact that living the way you're living at the moment is not going to put you in a position where you're able to ever move forward in any direction unless you change. So get rid of your credit cards, right? And tighten your belt, or change what you're doing. If you're employed for someone and you're an electrician and you're earning no money and you're not being paid enough, look at going self-employed. All of these are major steps, but young men these days need to get a grip of things, because if you're beholden to someone else for anything, you're going to be taken advantage of.
I found this got easier as I got older, because in my 20s, I was smoking way more cigarettes. I don't smoke anymore, drinking all the time. I don't drink anymore. And I found once I cut those two things out of my life, all of a sudden my finances started to make sense, But especially, I think there's a lot of 20-year-old guys who could figure it out. But once I found that even in our lives with my wife, once we started doing stuff like meal prep, cooking more at home, you actually do feel better. You feel the sense of having more discipline and control over your life really will correct so many other things in your life. And you realize that all the stuff I was spending money on also made me feel bad physically, mentally, that
Yeah.
stuff like that.
I mean, when I say I've had to, be blunt and point out the blatantly obvious to some people, when they say, I can't do that, I've got no money at the end of a month. If you actually sit down and work out their outgoings and what they're spending the money on, even they're surprised at the, I only go out once a week and I only spend £50, which isn't a lot, on a night out with the lads. I buy, dinner every day because I'm out working. I've got to buy lunch. And you say, well, if you were to make sandwiches and take those, and if you were to actually say three nights out, I'll go out once a month instead of every week, suddenly you've got 150 quid, £150 left at the end of the month. And that's just on cutting down the amount you're spending on alcohol on a night out in a week and making sandwiches instead of going to the chip shop or buying a pizza at lunchtime.
I knew guys who would do that.
I know, and so do I. But the thing is, people get into a rut, and they think that that's just normal, and it may be normal. But if you want to change your life, you're even in a position now where you can do it, or if you want to be in that position and you're not, you need to change something. It doesn't matter what it is, but you need to change something if you're not in a position to do it.
And if I have another piece of advice to give people, and you had said something on that, I believe it was that stream. It was either that or it might have been with Millennial Woes. But you were talking about how you're not really afraid of failing. You were talking about starting your own small businesses, and then one failed, and then another failed. You kept doing it until it succeeded. Same thing with the house. You just kept at it and trying to learn until you succeeded. And if there's one piece of advice I give to people, come to me all the time and ask questions. I'm like, once you're not afraid, it's easy to not be afraid of failure if you have a goal. And then you learn fast through failure more than through study. So when I talk to like 20-year-olds or whatever, maybe even younger than that, I'm like, you're at the perfect window of time where failures aren't going to hurt that much. So like, I would encourage you to fail now. Now is the time to try, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky insofar as my father was self-employed and kind of sat me down at an early age and pointed out the blatantly obvious, which is if you're working for someone else, they're getting quite a lot of the money that should be going to you. And that's rightly so, because it's their business and they took the risks to start it. But you need to realize that if you want to earn proper money and be in control of how much you earn and how often you work and the hours you work, then it needs to be your business. So I was self-employed from quite an early age. And the weird thing is, I wouldn't even say that the businesses failed. It was that I would start a business and I would get it up to a certain level. And because I was young, I'd get bored. I would become bored with what I was doing and want to do something else that could probably lead on to something better or bigger. So I would, walk away from a business that was working perfectly well, to be honest, and start another one. And, some failed. Some I would go into and think this is a brilliant idea, and I'd start it up, and I'd rent a little office and I'd start doing stuff. And 6 months later, and I'm earning no money, and I think, well, I could either go back to what I was doing before, I can come up with another idea. So I would come up with something and start something else. And it didn't matter. You're quite right. When you're young, when you're in your late teens, early 20s, if something doesn't work out, it's not that important. There's always something else you can do. If you're in your late 40s and you've got a family and kids, it's a bigger decision to take.
Yeah, I say take advantage of being 20 and feeling invincible if you can. And another thing is just to your point, because you had mentioned seeking out knowledge. This is something I know we're kind of in an advice section of the thing, but I find this stuff interesting because when I got into shooting guns, so I shoot trap and skeet, shotgun stuff, did not run in my family at all. No one in my family owns guns, and I was just the first guy. I had no practical knowledge. I wasn't raised in it. So as a grown man, starting anything as a grown man is kind of weird because you're afraid that, oh, I'm going to be made fun of. I'm going to do it wrong. But you'll find, and maybe this is your experience, but you'll find that once you start talking to people who are experts at this, they're very, very nice and encouraging. Like you just walking down to, buy some lumber, talk to a construction guy. I bet that was a pretty, friendly, okay experience, wasn't it? It wasn't scary.
I mean, this is something else I learned really, really early on. Again, from my dad, who who taught me this because of some of the people I was hanging around with at the time, and he was trying to dissuade me from this. But the lesson stuck, and what he said was, "You're going to find that you will become like the people you spend time with and the people you hang around with." And he said, if you're going to hang around with deadbeats and, people who don't earn a lot of money and have gone nowhere in life, kind of guess where you're going to end up. And he said, if you hang around with smart people that are going places, that own their own business, you're going to find that opportunities present themselves much more readily. And in the end, you're going to become like the people you hang around with. and the people you're getting advice from. And I kind of thought, yeah, it makes sense. You know, if you want to be a good bank robber, go and hang around with bank robbers because they've done it. They know what they're talking about. And if you want to be a good construction worker, go and hang around with the best construction workers because do you know what? They'll give you the best advice and they know what they're talking about. And if you want to know how to build a cabin in the woods, your best bet, go and talk to someone who's built a cabin in the woods and bought some land. And that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Talk to the people that have done it.
Yeah, and there'll be a bit of a learning curve because my friend, my host, who couldn't be here, he's at work right now, but he's a tradesman, and he was telling me a funny story that, he had to buy new tools, and then he's on the shop floor, and everyone, I didn't know this because I'm not in carpentry or anything, but they make fun of you if your tools look too new. So
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, so it's actually better to have shitty old looking tools. But yeah, they'll make fun of you for a minute if you just show up. Like me at the shotgun range, I showed up. I'm like, I don't know what this is. I look like an idiot. It's going to be a learning curve, but in a sense, you kind of become addicted to learning curves at a certain point. I'm at an age where I know if there's a steep learning curve, that means I'm going to learn a lot very, very fast. And that sensation becomes exciting after a certain point. That's me,
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm exactly the same. And when I say I had no construction knowledge at all when I built this place, that's absolutely right. And I kind of amazed myself as I went on, and at every stage of the build, when the framework went up, and that went up within 7 days. I had the whole framework for this place put up in a week, and it didn't fall over. And I was literally like amazed that I'd done this. And then the roof beams went on, and then the roof went on, and it didn't blow off, and it was fixed on right. And I had to learn how to do all this stuff, and it's not only is it an achievement, right, but it does not half make you feel good when you've learned something, put it into practice, and it works. So yeah, good advice from people who have done it. A little bit of practical assistance when needed. And anything's possible. Do you know what I mean? You can do pretty much anything you want if you put your mind to it and you've got the right advice.
There's one thing I wanted to get into, and perhaps we should have got to this earlier, but I am interested in. Um, I don't think we discussed this. Sort of the reason you decided to go off grid, and you seem to have lived a pretty successful life prior to going off grid. So it's not like you were necessarily chased there. Was there any political or any strong reason that kind of drove you to this?
Yeah, I mean, I was political for most of my life from the age of 12. So I started very, very young, and I was red pilled on race before politics. I had run-ins with a gang of black youths on a regular basis. I'm again down to my dad, who had taught me how to stick up for myself when I was very young, and had always taught me, you don't run from someone, a bully, right? Stand your ground, because then they'll just leave you alone because you're too much hard work. They'll move on to someone else. And that was a lesson that was true and stood with me. And when this gang of coloured youths were extorting money, really, and they took money off of all the other kids, and they would come round to me and said, have you got money? And I'd say yes. And they say, right, we want some. And I'd say no. And I would get a punch in the ear or a punch in the lip. And I'd come home every Saturday and my dad would say, what's happened to you? And I'd say, oh, just running with the coloured kids or whatever. And in the end, he got fed up with it, dragged me down the police station, which I didn't want to do because he'd also taught me not to be a grass. But he said, no, this has gone on far enough. So he went to the police station, and the police refused to do anything because they were black. And he kind of lost his temper. And we ended up with the race relations officer in our house, talking to my father and me when I was 12. And the race relations officer basically said, listen, this is just after the first sort of race riots in the UK in the early 80s. If we start sort of cracking down on these young coloured kids, we stand the chance of, riots kicking off in the town or whatever, and we don't want that to happen. So there is a softly approach. Maybe I could, I might be able to have a word with their parents, but maybe it'd be best if your boy just avoids them. And my dad promptly threw him out of the house, shouting about mob rule and everything. He was furious. He was absolutely furious.
I'm a bit furious right now just listening to it. I gotta mute myself so people can't hear me seething right now.
So and I was kind of left in a position at 12 years old where I was like, well, this is something's wrong here. But there was no one really talking about it politically wise. There was no, the mainstream parties weren't really discussing this. And the only people that were the right-wing parties of the day. So back in the sort of very early 80s, it would have been the National Front. And they had a paper, and I eventually got round to reading that and was given that by, one of the older kids. And that's how I got involved with right-wing politics. And that took up a fair chunk of my early sort of teenage into my 20s life. But after being involved with group and political parties and political organizations, all of these smaller right-wing parties, and it's easy to get swept up in them because you understand that what they're trying to do is right. It did become blatantly obvious that there was no way that they were ever going to be allowed to get near the levers of power, which is quite disheartening, but you do have to be a realist and look at how the system operates, how these smaller parties operate, and was it really likely? And I was getting into the realms of, maybe if there was some sort of catastrophe, something will happen, which will turn the people the right way, and it never seemed to happen. So I kind of withdrew from small right-wing political parties anyway. And then when Labour got in 1997, I couldn't go back to the smaller parties and hope that they had any chance of getting them out. So I actually joined the Conservative Party, and to my shame, in the hope that I could see how it operated from the inside and see if it was possible to move that party or sections of it further to the right, because I knew there was a lot of disenfranchised hard right-wingers. And there is a way that can be done at grassroots level. And I was quite happy to see that. The problem arises as you get up into the higher echelons of these mainstream parties, which I rapidly did. I mean, within 3 months, I ran the Conservative Business Club. I put together the Young Conservatives in the Southwest. I ran the Conservative European Committee. I sat on several others. I was taken to the House of Commons and whatever with the local MP. I was put forward as a candidate, as a councillor. So once you get up into the top levels where you're talking to MPs in the House of Commons, what became obvious to me was that there's nothing between the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats. They were all part of exactly the same club and exactly the same segment of the system. They did nothing but perpetuate the system. It didn't matter which party got in. They were still eating their meals together. They were still laughing in the bar together. They still went on holiday together. And these are members of opposite parties who were screaming and shouting in front of the TV cameras across the House of Commons, and then sitting down to a 4-course meal and going on holiday together. And it became obvious that there was nothing could be done from inside any political party. The whole lot was rotten.
Well, this is fascinating. I think you're a real good fountain of knowledge on this topic, especially because, and to your credit, I don't think you should feel bad about joining the Conservatives. My memory of the conservative movement back then, and I'm not, I'm just in my 30s, so my memory might be a bit shoddy, but I remember like things like what you're talking about, more people were able to discuss them more openly. But I think what's so fascinating is that you got early on that the higher up you get, maybe that's all just smoke and mirrors, which I don't think a lot of people got. And what's interesting is I'd love to hear your opinion about what you thought when you saw the UKIP thing happening. Were you excited, or were you just like, this is the same sort of shit?
No, I knew exactly what that was right from the beginning. And most people won't even remember when that started right at the beginning, when it was, God, I can't even remember the chap's name, Goldman something. No, it was a pressure release valve, and that's all that was ever going to be. It gave people a place to vent their anger, and it was never going to lead to a place of power, ever. And I'd already seen how the system had dealt with the National Front when a grassroots movement actually started to become popular. And the National Front did in the 1970s. I think they polled 11% of the vote, which was absolutely massive. And in 1979, when Thatcher got in, they were absolutely wiped out. Completely wiped out, because the system will do anything it has to in order to protect itself. And all parties, Labour, Conservative, Liberal, the Social Democrats were around then as well, will all work together in order to maintain the system. So there was no way UKIP was going to work. And at the end of all of that, and I left the Conservative Party, and I'll be honest with you, they were talking about putting me forward as an MP the following year in a safe seat, and I could have just rode the gravy train. But it wasn't why I was there. I wasn't there for that. So I left, and I was then in a situation where I understood that the system was utterly corrupt, hell-bent on just maintaining its power. And I had to do everything I could to literally eliminate my dependence upon it. I had to become self-sufficient as much as I possibly could. And that's what led me to looking at how you can do that, how you can, close down bank accounts, use cash only, how you can have no credit cards, how you can buy land, build a house, grow food, keep livestock. And no matter what happens around you, you could actually still feed yourself, have shelter, water, and it can't be taken away from you.
That's very, very fascinating stuff. And I think a lot of people are probably energized from hearing that. And I wanted to know, and this might sound like an odd question, but it sounds very much like the workings of, this might be the wrong phrase to use, but almost like a parallel society, which is something that a lot of people talk about. And I was wondering if homesteaders or people who live off grid, have you noticed that there's a sort of mutual aid network happening? And the reason I ask this is because, me and my wife have looked into homeschooling, and what I've noticed from homeschooling communities is it's not just one person homeschooling, it's a whole community, and then they help each other, they go on field trips, so it's really this almost parallel school network. Do you see anything like that happening for people as this scene and movement starts to grow?
I've spoken about this quite a lot over the last year, which is we need to actually start looking at a parallel system, a parallel society. There is a lot more people looking at going off grid, even if not off grid, of building their own places and being more self-sufficient. And I think self-sufficiency is the way to go, so that your reliance on a system that is designed to actually crush you or kill you, right, is brought down to a minimum. Your reliance on that system that is your enemy, it should be non-existent. And the more people move towards that, and there are more, I've already seen, I'm a member of maybe 4 or 5 groups, and they're not all off-gridders. They are all groups of people that were looking to put together either cultural systems or social systems or financial systems that are separate from the system we live under, from the regime we live under. So there's talk of many different aspects. These will all come together because the people are all on the same side. And there are social groups, people going, right, what we should do is get together, keep politics out of it, because, I want to take my wife, who's non-political, and my kids, and I don't want, politics rammed down their throat, but they need to know that these people are good people. We can just go out and we can have a meal and we can go for a walk and we can, go camping in the woods together. That's the social aspect. There's people talking of cultural things. So there's people now making films, doing short stories, writing books, putting on plays. And these are all people our side of the fence. And there's people talking about how can we introduce a separate financial system? What could we do? Does it have to be silver? Does it have to be based on, gold standard? Or can we introduce something else? So at least these discussions are taking place. That will lead to, and I've kind of pointed out before that this has been done before and successfully. If you look at the Czech Republic, they started a parallel society when they were under communist rule. So the dissidents in the Czech Republic started cultural things, writing, plays, films, and a financial system that was outside of the communist regime. And they were persecuted for it and whatever. But it worked. The people started to use it. The people started to watch these films. They started to read these books, and they started to use a different currency. And when the communists pulled out of the Czech Republic, it was the leaders of that dissident movement that became the new government. And they weren't a political party. They were just the people that had put together a parallel society. So it has been done, and it has worked in the past. And there's lessons to be learned from history.
I think that's important to let people know, is that this has been done before, especially in the 20th century. It's not something you need to necessarily go back centuries to find, which is, I find what some people want to do, and this again might sound like a pretty basic question, but I know a lot of people who would, this sort of thing would appeal to. A lot of them would call themselves like eco-fascists or deep ecologists. And they might have an unfriendly view towards technology, the Ted Kaczynski people. And I was wondering, do you have any sort of rules or principles regarding technology, or are you kind of, you don't give a shit as long as it gets the job done?
Yeah, I'm kind of, let's get the job done. And I'm also a realist. Most people look at the way I live and figure, I would be completely against technology. I kind of laugh because I can live the way I do because of technology. My solar panels and the inverter charger, which is like a little box of witchcraft. I don't know how it works. It takes sun rays which hit a solar panel, which when I kind of think about it, the solar panel is just like a slab of stone. It's silicon, and that sunlight goes down a wire into this box of magic, and then is turned into electricity, which charges my batteries on the one hand, and then which again is just lead and acid. and something weird happens in there, and that puts power back into this box, which then goes into the cabin. I don't need to know how this technology works. What I do know is when I turn the light switch on, it works, and my light comes on. So fantastic. I will use technology. And some of this stuff is cutting edge. Do you know what I mean? It's like the latest stuff. I use a smartphone. There's lots and lots of people in the dissident right who was like, ditch your smartphone. It's, it'll take up too much of your time. Not only that, they can track where you're going. If I wouldn't need to go somewhere and I don't want to be tracked, I won't take my smartphone. I'm not stupid. But it's actually a really handy tool for me. I've got access to lots of things on there which are useful to me, and I'll use it. For them to say, yeah, but they'll be able to track where you are. Well, you know what? They already know where I am. They didn't use my smartphone to figure out where I was. It took them a couple of months, and, they're not stupid. If they need to find you, they'll find you. The system is huge and all powerful. So, unless you're going to go completely, sleeping in a sleeping bag, hidden in a hedge somewhere, right, they'll find you wherever you are. So don't fret about that.
What's funny? Before we go on, there's a story to that. We're going to talk about this on the show. It'll be aired by the time this episode airs. But my friend, my co-host, used to live in Hong Kong. He's born in Canada, moved there for a while, then moved back just recently. And he has a house. He rents a house. And then all of a sudden, and you know everything about China. You know everything about the stories you hear. And of course, China's relationship to Canada. He finds this like Chinese woman one day just like skulking around his house. He lives in a rural area, by the way. And then they're just looking around and he's like, what's going on? She's got an alibi, but she can barely speak English. She says she's from Beijing. She says, "Oh, I was just walking by." And it's like, you're in the middle of fucking nowhere. That doesn't make sense why you would be there. But they found him. They found him from fucking China somehow. And they're interested in what he's got going on. That's all it is. But my mind was blown when I heard that story.
Well, the chaps that turned up here, I was fairly sure I knew why they turned up anyway. And I said, okay, come in, let's have a cup of coffee. I said, right, you're here because you want to make sure this isn't Ruby Ridge or, another Waco. And they were like, yeah, kind of. You come up on the radar. And it was obvious to me. I mean, I was going to be on their list anyway. And when I crop up on YouTube as this, crazy dude living in the woods, they're like, yeah, this is ringing alarm bells. What's he actually doing there? So, and they'd obviously, they even said they'd, sent someone here to recon after they'd figured out where it was. It took them 3 months to find it. They sent recon here, make sure it was the right place. 2 chaps turned up. And they came and they saw that I was actually living in a cabin in the woods and there wasn't an army out the back. And, they saw the chickens and they saw the turkeys and they were like, yeah, okay, you've done really well. It looks really nice. Okay, goodbye. But now they know for definite where I am. Okay. And you're not going to, by not using a smartphone or whatever, you're not going to hide from these guys, right? You're not going to hide from the system. If you're a dissident and you need to, you should be able to, okay? But in real life, okay, they're going to find you. And if you've got a bank, like most people, if you've got a bank account and you're registered at a doctor's, right? How long do you think it's going to take them to find you? Really? They've got your address already. And they've got all your known associates and all of your family, and it'll take them a day. So, forget about not using technology. Use it to your advantage, okay, and put it away if it's becoming a hindrance. But no, I'm not anti-technology. In fact, I would say that technology is probably going to be how we get out of this, because I'm big on self-sufficiency. And I think that by utilizing technology in the right way, we can actually make things really much simpler and much easier for our population. At the moment, the technology is going to be used against us. It should be being used for us.
I agree completely. And this is something I won't give too much of it away, but I would always tell people that if you have dreams of receding from the system or avoiding surveillance, you're in for a rude awakening. And my strategy, in so many words, in short, would be you're better off trying to confuse it. You're better off trying to confuse the cameras than avoid the cameras. So rather than cut yourself off from, social media or whatever, make 100 fake profiles. Like just, and
Yes,
I know I've known e-celebs
do
who've
what
done
you
this
need to
too.
do. I mean, the fact of the matter is, because of the organisations I was involved in when I was younger, my name would have been on a list somewhere. So it doesn't take much for your name to crop up again years later, a cross-reference. And if you're doing anything a bit wacky, like me, because there isn't that many online in the dissident right at the moment that are doing this, so it was obvious that it piqued interest. Which, I'm not stupid. I understand that, but it's you're
It's
not going to
interesting.
avoid everything.
I was going to say for people, I'm not trying to like black pill anyone here, but you are correct in the sense that a lot of people will think that, oh, if I order book X from Amazon, then I'm on a list. I'm like, no, you're already on a list when you looked it up. You were on the
Yeah,
list when you were browsing. And because I work in marketing and work in advertising, and so if you do any Facebook advertising over the years, you'll notice that you have less targeting data that you can target. You used to be able to just target black people. You can't target black people anymore. It's too racist. However, that data is still being collected. The data
yeah,
of your web activities. So you don't need to order like Mein Kampf, but they can aggregate, say, he didn't do one red flag, but he's got a bunch of orange and yellow flags. And then they
yeah.
aggregate that from every other platform and say, okay, now you're a problem person just because they can tell you're thinking about something. And so it's like, well, whatever. So I got to work within that paradigm, right?
Yeah, well, I used to live in Cheltenham in the UK, and the chap who lived above me worked for GCHQ, and he never gave me a lot of information, but he did give me overall what could happen. I mean, his job was incredibly boring. He used to just read Russian papers looking for keywords, but he did that every day, all day, every day. And then certain things would be plugged through a computer and whatever. But that he was just like a speed reader, just picking out certain words, and then it would go on to something else, and then it would go through a computer. But he said, GCHQ's got everything. Everything that's being done, like online, right, can be and probably is monitored, all of it. So you're not going to get away with it if they need to. It can be used if they need to. So what you've got to just make sure is you're not stupid. Just don't be stupid.
Exactly. And because I think the reason they're scared of someone like you is because you are not a crazy guy living in the woods. You're a very sensible, intelligent, normal guy living in the woods. And that's making it an attractive prospect for people. If you
Yeah,
were, I've known a few crazy guys who lived in the woods that
yeah,
they don't think they're
no,
trouble.
I know a few, and to be honest, they don't last long. They're usually we had one in the same woods here because it's not just me living it. I thought it would be just me, but I think there's one, two, three, there's four now, and there was five, and one of them was batshit crazy, and he's no longer here. He was rounded up and taken away, and will never return. Um, he had booby traps in his land, and completely off his tree. Yeah, you don't last like that. You won't. But if you're a normal guy just trying to do the right thing, trying to look after yourself and trying to look after your family, do you know what? The system might not like it, but you're not breaking laws or anything. You're actually doing the right thing.
It's funny. I'll tell a story here that some people on Telegram might have known about. There was this guy I spoke to a few times. He's a real character on Telegram. His name was Siege Bus. And I think he passed away maybe a year ago. Very tragic. I don't know the cause of death, but he was a guy, young guy, really, really far right, would wear a skull mask, and he would live. Allegedly, he lived in a school bus in the woods, and his whole thing was he wore a kilt all the time. So, and he loved to challenge people to fight. And there's all these fight videos of him just getting into Telegram arguments, and they're like, "Meet me here," and they record it. And so there's all these almost like bum fights or something of him just winning the fights, and then, but then I think he died. He either died perhaps by suicide, perhaps just because you can't really live in a school bus in the woods long term. So unfortunately, that's one case where he might have just the same thing happened. Maybe he just washed out, but you're going to find a lot of those guys. And I kind of miss them just because I like knowing those guys are kind of running around out there, causing stories and talking about sunning their balls and stuff. But,
But I'll tell you the thing that surprised me, which is when I say to people I live in a cabin in the woods, is the preconceived idea of what people have of that. So usually it's small. It'll be one room, maybe two, and the only sort of light is a Davy lamp or a hurricane lamp, and a big open fire.
they imagine a unibobber cabin, I bet.
Yes. Or it's so basic, like, well, how come you don't freeze in the winter? And is there wind blowing through the paneling and that? And then when they come up here and they see that I've got a microwave and a big American sort of Smeg fridge freezer and a washing machine and a tumble dryer and everything that they've got in their house, and it's 3 times the size of their house, and they're like, wow, it's an actual home. And I'm like, well, yeah, because I've got a wife. And I did have kids at the time when I started this. And as much as my wife kind of is up for living in the woods, right, she wanted plastered walls and, a washing machine. And I couldn't convince her otherwise. So you have to think outside the box and go, okay, if we're going to have all of these things, how do we power it and how can we do it? And then you work it out.
It's funny you say that. Like my wife, like she's down for a lot of stuff, but one thing I know she needs is a good washroom and hot water. That's the baseline, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, mine's the same. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, even if you had a set of builders come in and do it for you, because of the type of lifestyle, there'll be an issue along the line. And let's say you've got no water. Now, if you're living in normal suburbia, that might, if they're working on the water mains, they'd send you a letter first. They'll tell you when it's going to be cut off. Or even in, if there's an accident and your water's cut off, you've got a whole team of like everyone working around the clock to fix that as fast as possible out off grid or wherever. It's down to you. You got to sort out the problem, find out where it is, fix it. Have all the parts to hand, have the tools to do it, and I kind of like that. I mean, I like that. Oh man, there's another problem. I got an issue here, right? And so, we've had no water twice in 6 years, which isn't bad. But the last time it was 4 days. So, we got a lot of water containers here. So I'd go down to my studio in town, fill up, 200 litres of water, and that'd last, there's sort of a week's worth of water there. And so you can get round it. And I'd do that because I'd say, well, I'm working all week until Thursday. And on Thursday, I will track down the problem, figure out what it is and fix it. So I'm in a lucky position that my wife will roll with that. She's at a point now where she knows that the payoff is enough that you ride these problems because you've got the life you have. And 9 times out of 10, when people are worrying about how they're going to pay their mortgage or, the rise in energy prices or the rise in living costs, and we're sat with our feet up in front of a log burner, with no worries, it's worth the little things that can go wrong.
That's a very encouraging point you just made. And I know you probably got to get back to it very soon, so we can wrap this up quickly. On one last thing I want to know from you, and this is kind of a broad question, so feel free to just have fun with it. But I was wondering, when you got into this, is there anything that, this is going to be sound super like, where to get your ideas from? But like, was there anything that you encountered that really surprised you? Anything that you came in with one assumption, it was completely proven wrong, or something that really surprised you that you maybe wished you knew beforehand?
Like, two very short stories then about surprises. The first was the build, and this was mainly because I'd never built anything before. I thought that the building of the structure, of the building of the actual cabin, would be the long part. And the inside bit, once I got onto the inside, that would be a piece of piss. Excuse my French. I thought that would be easy, but actually getting a building up would take the time. The building was up in less than 4 weeks. The inside, the internals, took months and months and months. And it's the stupid things. The wiring. I'm not an electrician, so I had a word with an electrician and said, well, what wire do I need to run for the sockets? What wire do I need to run for the lights? And can you just draw me a kind of rough diagram? So I went and bought a roll of 50 meters, I think it was, of wire to do the lights. And that 50 meters got 2 rooms done, I think. And I've got 4 bedrooms, a dining room, a kitchen, a utility room, a lounge, a separate other room. So, and I was like, how was this taken? And I had to drill over 700 holes.
Holy shit.
Through stud work, through roof beams, like just to thread this wire, so it had to go up. You can't put it on the outside of the stud work, otherwise the plasterboard won't fit. So you've got to drill through the stud work, and then it's got to go to switches, which you've got to work out where they are, and then from the switch, you leave a loop there, then up through more stud work, and then you've got to take it along the ceiling. So all the roof beams, that had to drill holes through each one, and then it's got to come down into the next room. So you've got to drill down through all the stuff. It just took me. That was the longest job of the whole build, was just putting the wiring in. But I ran all the wires myself, and then right at the very end, I got an electrician to come in, and I'd already spoken to him about what wires to use and what switches to get and what sockets to get. And then he came in, and I said, how much do you charge for a day? And he said, £300 for a day. So I was like, okay. Come in on the last day, fit my consumer unit, the fuse box, and wire in my sockets and switches. He said, yeah, I can do that in a day. He came in, he was finished by lunchtime, charged me 250 quid, knocked 50 quid off because it was only half a day's work. Tested it all for me, made sure everything was fine, no wires broken anywhere, all the light switches worked, all the sockets worked. Job done. But I did the donkey work. And he said, if you'd had me wire this place, he said, I probably could have done it in half the time, because he knows what he's doing. He said, but it still would have cost you a couple of £1,000. So I saved a couple of £1,000 by doing it, and, learned some lessons.
Did he think you did a good enough job too? Like it was up to par?
He said, you've done all the donkey work, all the hard work. The easy bit for him was just wiring it into the fuse box. And I got him to do all that because I didn't know what I was doing. So, yeah, I mean, actually threading the wires through and that, he said I would have had to do the same thing. I just would have got it done faster because I know what I'm doing. So that was a surprise. The inside work and putting plasterboard up and then taping it and plastering it and paint, yeah, that took months and months, much longer than getting the building up. So that was a surprise. The other one I had was when I first bought the land, a bloke turned up, introduced himself, and was kind of saying, what did you buy the land for then? And I was a bit cagey as well. I didn't know him. And he apparently owned a plot of land at the top of the woods. So I said, we're going to keep some animals here and, whatnot. And I kind of just thought, well, I'm going to say this because he owns land here, see what he thinks. And I said, well, I'm probably going to put a little cabin out the back for weekends or whatever. And he was like, oh, right, that's cool. And I thought, right, that's good. So that's a neighbour who's, not going to worry that I'm putting a cabin in. And I said, what about you? And he said, I always fancied a treehouse. And I thought, my initial reaction was, the bloke's obviously got kids and he's built them a treehouse. And he said, you will have to come up one day. And about 3 weeks later, I thought, I'll take a walk up, see if he's, on it in his woods. So I walked sort of half a mile up the lane and sort of found his plot and sort of walked down and called his name. And as I sort of got through into the middle of his woods, in this tree was a 2-story treehouse that was something like out of an Ewok village. It was, I'd never seen anything like it. Now, he sort of came down, and I was stood looking in amazement at this thing. And he said, come up. And I went up this ladder through a trapdoor into a treehouse. And he showed me into the top floor and, where his bedroom was and that. And I came back down and I was sat in an armchair in front of a log burner. He was sat in another chair, drinking a cup of coffee that he'd cooked in the kitchen in this treehouse. And I was blown away. I was literally blown away because for any bloke, I think that is like the ultimate fantasy, that like your own livable treehouse. And I was like, where do you have a shower? Where do you wash? Where do you do this? And he was like, and I'm sat drinking this coffee, and my wife phones me, and she's in our plot of the woods, and she says, where are you? And I was just like, you are never, ever, ever going to believe where I am. I was sat in this treehouse, like drinking coffee in front of a log fire. It was bizarre. And his place kind of just, when I came away from there, I thought, wow, man, now I can see that anything is possible if you just put your mind to it. And this was a bloke, lived on his own, had just built this place because he had always wanted one. And it was incredible. And it spurred me on even more. And then I thought, right, I've just seen that this can be done. Right, not a video, that you can actually build somewhere and live in it. And that was it for me. I was blown away by that.
It's funny. When you first started that story, I thought it was going to go the direction of you met a skinwalker, or like you went there and found just like a bunch of flesh or something. But then, like, I know from hearing that story, the same light bulb just went over the heads of most of the guys listening to this. Like, I didn't think that was possible. I didn't think you could do it. Now that's precisely what I want to do. I'm going to go tell my fucking wife we're going to build a treehouse now.
I mean, the weird thing is, he came down. I mean, we're good friends now, and he came down while I was building mine, and he was like, "Man, this is huge." And I'm like, "Do you know what? I don't want to build it too small. If I build it too small, then I've got to start adding things to it. So, if it's a bit big, then some of it I won't use." And he was like, "Yeah, I need a bit more room." So he went back to his and then built from the bottom of the treehouse down to the ground, and built a music studio and a new lounge and put in a new shower, and gave himself more room because he'd seen what I could do.
That's so cool. He essentially built a tower.
Now, should I tell you what it looks like? Have you ever seen the old wooden windmills?
Yeah.
They're kind of sort of hexagonal in shape. And his place now kind of just reminds me of, if you took the blades off, took the sails off of a windmill, it kind of looks like one of those, but with a tree growing out of the top of it. It's phenomenally beautiful. The bloke's a craftsman. and an artist. He started off as an artist and then wanted to earn some real money, so got into sort of craft work. But the place is stunningly beautiful, and it's inspiring. But it was nice to see that he could come down and see what I was doing, and then went back and was inspired by that to go back and change his, which is cool, man. And that's the way it should be. Do you know what I mean? We kind of work together, we learn from each other, we take ideas and put them back into our own lives.
And you're not, you're not getting grifted on anything. And also, based on that story, I know what every single guy hearing that story is thinking. They're imagining it. They're thinking, okay, now it's platforms, now it's bridges, now every tree's in play. Now I'm building an empire, now I'm rebuilding Rome.
Yes, and do you know what? That's the beauty of it. I mean, but the first thing is, and I do want to touch on this briefly because it gets back to those people who say, do you know what? I'd love to do this, but I can't afford it. I understand that. I really do. Well, get 5 of you together. Do what Charlemagne's doing. Him and 4 of his mates clubbed together, bought enough land that they can all have a little cabin. Get 10 of you together. You'll have enough room for 10 cabins and enough room for communal land and enough room that you can have your own allotments as well. So you can grow some food, keep some animals. You've got 9 guys around you, 9 families around you who will help you out. If you've got a problem, you can help them out. Doing this together is the next step. I honestly believe that.
And another thing is, I wish my co-host could be here because he kind of hit the ground running. I just told the story of him moving back, but I'm always impressed by his ingenuity and his ability to find deals and things for free and things to help. Like he kind of hit the ground running coming back to Canada. Within a week, he just goes on marketplaces. You want to talk about using social media and technology to our benefit? You go on these marketplaces, you can find so much stuff for free. He just got like a free meat smoker, electric one. So yeah, just the point being that if you actually look with intent, look not just seeing what's out there, look like I need to buy these tools, where can I find them? You can probably find free stuff, maybe even free wood, free lumber, free everything.
Everything. And the funny thing is, once you start living like this, your eyes are open all of the time. All of the time. You kind of become like a womble. Everything's got a use. I could use that for this. I'll keep hold of that. And it's important that the place doesn't turn into like a scrapyard. So have somewhere to store stuff. But I mean, I now know where I can go and get pallets free of charge, as many as I want. They can be used for building. They can be used for firewood. They can be used for pathways. No end of uses. So yeah, I mean, I've put myself in a position over the last couple of years where I am no longer really dependent on that system. I still dip in and out of it. I still earn money. But that's because I really enjoy what I'm doing, and it's my business. I can work when I want, and I don't have to if I don't want to. But yeah, I mean, just cutting myself out of the system and knowing that I haven't borrowed money to do this, that this is mine and it can't be taken away from me, puts me in such a enviable position. And I kind of get that. But what I'm trying to get across to everyone is, do you know what? You can do it. You can do this. And it doesn't have to be the same as mine. Mine isn't the same as the guy's treehouse up the road. And his treehouse isn't the same as the chap we helped build a cabin opposite me. So they're all different and they all fit each individual, right? But it is possible. The chap across the way from me phoned me and said, this is a few years back now, is it possible to build a cabin for £5,000? So I did some sums and I said, yeah, we can do it for £5,000. I priced up all the timber, told him how, where to buy it. If you buy it, I'll help you build it. And we built it pretty much 2 weeks. He sold his house.
Wow.
down on the coast, moved him, his wife, and his son into the cabin. 2 weeks.
That's impressive. I think
Completely doable. I mean, timber prices have risen since then, but you know, it's still comparable. And that was for a husband, wife, and son.
that's very, very encouraging, and I think that's probably a good place to end as any, because I know that our audience is going to love this episode. For my money, it's one of the top ones I've ever done. I think this has been a very, very illuminating and fascinating talk, and I just wanted to thank you once again for taking the time out of what I assume is a very, very busy schedule, especially this time of year.
I'm just off to feed the chickens now, so yeah, just about the right time.
Perfect. And just to remind people, you can find the Woodlander on YouTube. I believe you are also on Odyssey, and also on Telegram at t.me/the_Woodlander. You're going to see him, reposting a lot of stuff, a lot of people that we've had on the show before. So I highly recommend, and check out his other appearances on other shows. Every single one I've heard from you has been very, very enlightening. So before we go, I just wanted to say thank you again for taking the time, and good luck with your chickens.
I've really enjoyed it, mate. Thank you very much for having me on.
All right. I'll talk to you soon, man. Bye.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.